The desert sun beat down on forward operating base Echo, where the air crackled with tension and the weight of unspoken stories. Amid the chaos of military life, a lone figure moved quietly through the dust. Sarah Harper, 39, logistics coordinator, her worn baseball cap shielding a face that carried scars no one bothered to notice. Known only as the coffee girl, she shuffled supply crates and filed paperwork, her presence as unremarkable as the sand beneath her boots. But there was something about Sarah, something in the way her hands arranged medical kits with surgical precision, or how her eyes lingered on tactical maps, reading them like a book she'd written herself. Mocked by young officers, dismissed by her superiors, she bore their disdain in silence, her heart heavy with a past she'd chosen to bury. Yet in the stillness of a moonless night, when a distress call pierced the radio and good soldiers hung in the balance, the woman they ridiculed would step out of the shadows. Why did the enemy whisper her name, Ghost Viper, with fear? And what secrets did Sarah carry that could turn a forgotten worker into a legend? If you've ever felt unseen, underestimated, or burdened by mistakes you can't undo, Sarah's story will pull you in and remind you, sometimes the quietest souls carry the loudest courage. Keep reading to discover the truth behind the woman who chose invisibility, only to find redemption in the light. Sarah Harper, a seemingly ordinary logistics worker at Forward Operating Base Echo, hides a lethal past as Ghost Viper, a legendary special operations commander. Mocked by colleagues, she endures in silence, haunted by a failed mission that cost her squad's lives. When a patrol is ambushed, Sarah's instincts resurface, leading a daring rescue that exposes her identity. Enemy warlord Hassan Klov's chilling radio message confirms her return, shocking the base. As her past unravels, Sarah transforms from an invisible coffee girl to a revered trainer. But with her legend revived, can she escape the enemies hunting her? If Sarah's story of silent valor inspires you, join our community, subscribe to support our channel, share your thoughts in the comments, and tell us what city you're watching from. Let's honor the unsung heroes among us by keeping their stories alive. Hit that subscribe button now. At Forward Operating Base Echo, a sharp, commanding voice cut through the dusty air near the command tent. "Who let the coffee girl in here? Get her out!" The words dripped with scorn, reverberating across the bustling base. Moments later, a chilling transmission crackled over intercepted enemy radio frequencies, the voice cold and deliberate. "We want Ghost Viper. We know she's there." Heads snapped up, eyes darting to the spot where Sarah Harper, the unassuming logistics coordinator, had stood just seconds before. She was gone, leaving only questions in her wake. Who was this woman? Why was the enemy hunting a mere support staffer? Sarah Harper, 39, blended seamlessly into the rhythm of Base Echo. Her days revolved around mundane tasks, brewing coffee, managing supply inventories, and filing endless paperwork. Nothing about her screamed for attention. Her dark hair stayed tucked beneath a faded baseball cap, and her movements were quiet, precise, almost invisible. To most, she was just another cog in the military machine, reliable but unremarkable. No one bothered to dig into her past. No one thought to question the woman who kept the base running smoothly with her efficiency. Yet there was something about Sarah that didn't quite fit. She had an almost supernatural knack for anticipating the base's needs before anyone voiced them. When she delivered supply crates, she didn't just stack them haphazardly. Instead, she arranged them with a precision that felt tactical, positioning medical kits and ammunition for quick access, as if she'd run drills for this exact scenario countless times. A few grizzled veteran sergeants picked up on it. They noticed how her layouts mirrored the kind used in elite operations, but they brushed it off with a chuckle. "Probably binges war documentaries on her days off," one grumbled, shaking his head. They couldn't quite believe a logistics clerk could have such instincts. Behind her back, younger officers were less kind. Their whispers carried through the mess hall and barracks. "She's just dodging real duty," one sneered. "Bet she's here for the benefits without the guts to face combat." The words stung more than they knew. Sarah caught every snide remark, every dismissive glance, every patronizing smirk. She never reacted, though. She'd just pull her cap lower, her face a mask of calm, and keep moving. The weight of their judgment settled into her bones, but she bore it silently, her reasons buried deep. One incident burned brighter than the rest. During a routine briefing, Sarah had been summoned to deliver a stack of documents to the command area. She stepped into the room, her presence barely noticed until the duty officer glanced up, his face twisting with irritation. "What's she doing here?" he barked, his voice loud enough to silence the room. "Who let a support staffer into a restricted briefing?" All eyes turned to her. Some officers stifled laughs. Others shifted uncomfortably, avoiding her gaze. The air grew thick with humiliation. Sarah lowered her head, murmured a soft apology, and slipped out without a word of protest. Her cheeks flushed with shame, but her expression remained unreadable, a carefully crafted shield. No one in that room could have guessed the truth. 3 years earlier, Sarah had been someone else entirely. Known by her call sign Ghost Viper, she had been one of the military's most formidable special operations commanders. Her final mission, a Class A Avian Black Ops op, had ended in disaster. Her entire squad, soldiers she'd led, trained, and cared for, had been wiped out. The operation was erased from official records, but the guilt clung to her like a shadow. It gnawed at her, relentless, until she chose to vanish from active duty. She traded her commander's stripes for a logistics role, vowing never to lead anyone into harm's way again. Ghost Viper became a ghost in truth, hiding in plain sight among the crates and coffee pots. But some habits couldn't be unlearned. Her military instincts were etched into her very being. When she lingered near tactical discussions, eavesdropping through half-open doorways, she could predict enemy maneuvers with eerie precision. During logistics briefings, she spotted flaws in planning that even seasoned officers overlooked. Her mind worked like a battlefield strategist, even as she carried out menial tasks. The young lieutenant who mocked her daily, tossing barbs about her cushy job, had no idea he was ridiculing a woman who had once been a legend in the special forces. He couldn't see the nightmares that haunted her sleep, the memories of lost comrades that surfaced every time a helicopter roared overhead. He didn't notice how her hands trembled slightly at the sound, or how her eyes flicked to the sky, bracing for a threat only she could feel. The base commander, a stern figure with years of experience, began to notice subtle clues. There was something in the way Sarah moved, deliberate, controlled, like a predator lying in wait. When enemy chatter mentioned Ghost Viper, his suspicions crystallized. He dug into classified files, piecing together her identity. When he confronted her, it wasn't with accusations, but with a salute, a silent acknowledgement of her past heroism. The young lieutenant, once her loudest critic, overheard the truth and sought her out. His arrogance replaced with humility. He asked for her guidance, his apology clumsy but sincere. Even the duty officer, who had humiliated her in front of the room, began to show her quiet respect, his earlier disdain replaced with curiosity. Then there was Hassan Klav, a war criminal whose name sent a chill through Sarah's veins. He knew her call sign. He remembered Ghost Viper from a mission years ago, one that had left scars on both sides. His pursuit of her now threatened to unravel the life she'd built in the shadows. But Sarah Harper wasn't just a logistics coordinator. Beneath the baseball cap and the quiet demeanor burned the heart of a warrior, one who had never truly left the battlefield. Sarah Harper, known to a select few as Ghost Viper, was a 39-year-old logistics coordinator at Forward Operating Base Echo, her days filled with mundane tasks that belied her past as an elite special operations commander. She had chosen this quiet existence as a form of atonement, convinced that the weight of her past failures demanded a life of obscurity. The mockery from younger officers, the dismissive glances from her peers, the erasure of her former glory, she accepted it all as her due. In her heart, she carried the unshakable belief that she had faltered when it mattered most. And now she would serve in the shadows, unnoticed, never again risking the lives of those who depended on her. Yet some legacies are too potent to remain hidden, some stories too powerful to stay silent. The morning sun blazed mercilessly over the base, and Sarah faced yet another degrading task. The duty officer, his lips curling into a smug grin, ordered her to deliver operational files to the forward command post, a grueling 4-hour trek through treacherous mountain paths under a scorching sky. The assignment was a deliberate slight, a reminder of her perceived insignificance. Base vehicles, he claimed, were too valuable for a mere logistics run, and his smirk as he handed her the orders spoke volumes. Sarah packed the documents into her worn backpack, her movements mechanical, her face unreadable. The journey was perilous, winding through rocky terrain where insurgents often lurked, but no one seemed to care about the risks she faced. She set out on foot, her boots crunching against the dry earth, her mind a fortress against the indignity. At the forward command post, she encountered a group of young officers, their faces bright with the arrogance of inexperience. They were running a training exercise, their laughter echoing as they practiced tactical maneuvers with the fervor of soldiers yet to face the chaos of real combat. As Sarah approached, her arms laden with files, one lieutenant spotted her. His voice cut through the air, loud and mocking. "Hey, look, it's Ghost Viper," he jeered, referencing the call sign someone had scrawled on an abandoned Jeep as a cruel joke. "Still know how to count ammo, coffee girl?" The group burst into laughter, their taunts sharp and relentless. They had no inkling that Ghost Viper was once the covert name of a legendary hostage rescue specialist, a figure whispered about in the special operations community with equal parts awe and fear. To them, it was just a catchy nickname, perfect for their ridicule. Sarah stood frozen, her jaw tight, her eyes betraying a fleeting spark of something lethal, a glint that had once sent enemy commanders scrambling in retreat. But she smothered it, burying the fire deep within. Without a word, she turned and walked away, her silence a shield against their cruelty. Yet the pain etched across her face was unmistakable to anyone who bothered to look. No one did. "Bet she'll cry herself to sleep tonight," another officer muttered, sparking another round of chuckles. They were closer to the truth than they knew. That night, alone in her quarters, Sarah wept. Not for their mockery, but for the soldier she couldn't save, the mission that had shattered her confidence, the life she had forsaken in a desperate quest for redemption that felt forever out of reach. Everything shifted late that evening. A reconnaissance patrol on Ridgeline Alpha, 15 miles from the base, was ambushed. The radio crackled with a distress signal before falling ominously silent. Standard protocol demanded a tactical assessment before any rescue could be launched, a process that could take hours the trapped soldiers didn't have. Sarah was in the communications center when the call came through, her eyes scanning the faces around her. She saw hesitation, the paralyzing grip of bureaucracy that often cost more lives than enemy fire. Her gaze darted to the tactical map on the wall, her mind racing as she traced approach routes, calculated escape corridors, and pinpointed likely enemy positions. Her hands trembled, not with fear, but with the familiar rush of adrenaline she hadn't felt in 3 years. Every fiber of her being urged her to act, to grab her gear and move. Yet every rational thought screamed at her to stay hidden, to remain the invisible logistics clerk, to avoid the risk of failure once more. The blinking red dot on the map marked the ambushed patrol, each pulse a silent plea from soldiers fighting for their lives. The guilt of standing idle, of serving coffee while good men died, was a vice around her heart. Without a word, without seeking permission, Sarah made her choice. She slipped out of the communications center, her steps silent but resolute. In the storage locker, she retrieved her personal gear, body armor that molded to her frame as if it had never left her, weapons that felt like extensions of her own limbs, equipment she had sworn never to touch again. Under a moonless sky, the night cloaked her as she moved through the rugged terrain, a ghost reborn, driven by a purpose she could no longer deny. At Forward Operating Base Echo, Sarah Harper, a 39-year-old logistics coordinator, moved through her daily tasks with a quiet efficiency that masked her extraordinary past. To the casual observer, she was just another civilian contractor, blending into the rhythm of the base, delivering documents, organizing supplies, serving coffee in the mess hall. But beneath her unassuming exterior burned the soul of Ghost Viper, a former elite special operations commander whose name once struck fear into the hearts of enemies and commanded reverence among allies. For years, she had hidden in plain sight, her true identity buried under layers of secrecy in a carefully crafted facade. Sarah's days were filled with mundane routines, but her instincts remained razor-sharp, honed by years of navigating the deadliest corners of the world. She noticed everything: the cadence of a soldier's walk, the subtle shift in a radio operator's tone, the way the air felt heavier before a storm or an ambush. Her colleagues, unaware of her past, saw only a woman who kept to herself, her quiet demeanor mistaken for timidity. Veteran sergeants, grizzled by years of combat, occasionally caught glimpses of her tactical habits. The way she scanned a room, her fingers twitching as if reaching for a weapon that wasn't there. They dismissed it as overactive imagination, a quirk of someone who spent too much time around soldiers. They couldn't have been more wrong. One sweltering afternoon, a routine patrol fell into a brutal ambush deep in hostile territory. The radio crackled with desperation as the patrol leader's voice reported heavy enemy fire and mounting casualties. The situation was dire, a challenge that would have broken most special forces operatives. But Sarah was no ordinary operative. She wasn't just skilled, she was a phantom, a force of nature who had once redefined what was possible on the battlefield. When the call came for volunteers, Sarah didn't hesitate. She slipped away from her desk, her movements deliberate yet unnoticed, and reached the ambush site in precisely 14 minutes. She moved like a specter through enemy lines, her presence undetectable until it was too late for those who stood in her way. What unfolded next would etch itself into the lore of the soldiers she saved. The rescue was a masterclass in precision, surgical, devastating, and flawless. Sarah dismantled the enemy's advantage with a cold efficiency that left no room for error. By the time reinforcements arrived, the ambush had been neutralized. The patrol, battered but alive, owed their survival to an unknown female asset who, according to the patrol leader's radio report, came out of nowhere, disappeared the same way, with a level of professionalism beyond anything I've ever seen. Casualties were minimal, the enemy was in disarray, and the patrol was secure. Yet no one knew the identity of their savior. To them, she was a ghost, a fleeting shadow who had turned the tide of battle. Back at the base, as Sarah cleaned her weapons in the dim glow of a secluded corner, the command center intercepted a chilling transmission on an unsecured enemy frequency. A voice, thick with rage and trembling with fear, broke through the static. All units, immediate withdrawal. Ghost Viper is active in the sector. I repeat, Ghost Viper has returned to the field. The voice belonged to Hassan Klav, a notorious war criminal who had evaded capture for over a decade. Years earlier, he had witnessed Sarah's relentless prowess during a hostage rescue operation, one that still haunted his nightmares, waking him in a cold sweat, his screams echoing her call sign. The command center fell silent. Officers exchanged uneasy glances, their eyes darting to the empty space where Sarah had stood just hours before, delivering documents with a polite nod. The duty officer who had earlier humiliated Sarah by sending her on a degrading errand to deliver papers during a briefing felt the blood drain from his face. His casual dismissal of her now seemed like a grievous miscalculation. The young lieutenant, who had mocked her quiet demeanor and unremarkable role, felt a knot of shame twist in his gut. He had laughed at her, called her invisible, but now he saw her in a new light, a legend he had failed to recognize. The base commander, a seasoned officer who prided himself on knowing his people, felt a tremor of unease. Slowly he reached for his secure phone, his fingers hesitating before entering the codes for classified file access. For the first time in 3 years, the name Ghost Viper was uttered with the awe and dread it had once inspired. Sarah's colleagues had underestimated her. Her superiors had overlooked her. But there was one person who had never forgotten her. Hassan Klav, her enemy, knew exactly who she was. His voice, laced with terror, was a testament to her enduring legacy. To her teammates, she was a nobody, a logistics clerk who faded into the background. But to her enemy, she was a specter, a name that carried the weight of countless victories in unrelenting fear. The question lingered in the air like smoke. What was more terrifying? Being doubted by those who fought beside you, or being recognized by the one who feared you most? For Sarah, the answer was clear. The truest measure of a warrior's reputation was not the praise of allies, but the dread in the eyes of their foes. In the command center, the base commander's hands trembled as he entered his admiral-level security clearance codes. The files he sought were buried so deep that most generals didn't even know they existed. The screen flickered, displaying a stark warning. Phoenix Protocol, eyes only. Compartmentalized access required. He entered his final authorization, and the screen went black for several agonizing seconds before revealing a truth that would reshape everything he thought he knew. The file displayed a name: Sarah Catherine Harper. Call sign: Ghost Viper. Former commander of the Elite Special Operations Unit of Phoenix. Status: missing in action. Presumed KIA, Operation Blackwater, March 15th, 2021. The commander's breath caught as he scrolled through her service record. 11 successful hostage rescue operations, 17 high-value target eliminations, 0 mission failures until the one that had supposedly claimed her life. But Sarah wasn't dead. She was here, at his base, blending into the mess hall, her hands steady as she poured coffee. The photographs in her file told a story words could never capture. Sarah in tactical gear, leading elite teams through missions that defied belief. Sarah receiving commendations from shadowy officials whose names were redacted. Sarah standing among soldiers who gazed at her with the reverence reserved for legends. The final entry was a video from her last mission commander, a colonel whose voice was heavy with grief. Major Harper's unit was compromised during extraction, he said, his eyes hollow. We lost contact for 6 hours. When the area was secured, she was gone, presumed dead. The commander stared at the screen, his mind racing. The woman he had dismissed as ordinary was anything but. She was Ghost Viper, a name that had once echoed through the corridors of power and the battlefields of chaos. And now she was here, hidden in plain sight, her past a secret known only to her, and to the enemy who feared her most. At Forward Operating Base Echo, Sarah Harper, a 39-year-old logistics coordinator, moved through her days with quiet precision, her unassuming role masking a past life as an elite special operations commander. Known only to a few by her call sign, Ghost Viper, she carried the weight of her former identity like a shadow, one she had chosen to bury deep. 3 years ago, she had crawled out of a blood-soaked battlefield, the sole survivor of a mission gone horribly wrong. The official reports declared her dead, her unit, Phoenix, wiped out in a brutal ambush. The intelligence was wrong, but Sarah let it stand, choosing obscurity over facing the families of the soldiers she couldn't save. She had built a new life, one of routine and anonymity, hoping the ghosts of her past would stay buried. But secrets have a way of unraveling. The base commander, a stern figure with decades of service etched into his weathered face, sat alone in his office one evening, a classified file open before him. The pages detailed Sarah's true history, her leadership of Phoenix, her role in dismantling some of the world's most dangerous terrorist networks, and the catastrophic betrayal during Operation Blackwater that had cost 12 soldiers their lives. The commander's hands trembled slightly as he read, not from fear, but from awe. This woman, who had endured snide remarks and dismissive glances from her peers, was a hero whose sacrifices had saved over 200 lives. He closed the file with a heavy sigh, his mind racing with the implications of what he'd just learned. Standing, he made his way to the communication center, his steps deliberate, carrying the weight of a truth that demanded action. As he entered, the room fell silent. Every officer snapped to attention, sensing the shift in the air, a gravity that hadn't been there before. "Where is she?" the commander asked, his voice low but commanding. The duty officer, who earlier that day had publicly humiliated Sarah during a briefing, stammered, his face pale. "Sir, we don't know. She hasn't returned from the forward position." The commander's eyes narrowed. "Find her." Within an hour, Sarah was located, her silhouette cutting a solitary figure against the desert horizon. She didn't resist as she was escorted back to base, her expression unreadable, as though she had been waiting for this moment for years. She had always known the past would catch up. In the commander's office, the air was thick with tension. He stood behind his desk, dressed in his full uniform, the medals on his chest gleaming under the dim light. Sarah entered, her posture rigid, her eyes fixed on a distant point. The officers present expected a formal reprimand, perhaps a lecture on protocol. Instead, the commander did something that stunned them all. He stood straighter, raised his hand, and offered a salute. Not the perfunctory gesture exchanged between colleagues, but a crisp, reverent acknowledgement reserved for those who had faced the crucible of war and emerged unbroken. "Major Sarah Harper," he said, his voice steady and formal, "on behalf of this command, I apologize for the disrespect you have endured." Sarah didn't respond. She had learned long ago that words in moments like these only complicated things. Her silence was not defiance but survival, a shield against the emotions threatening to surface. The commander continued, his tone softening but no less resolute. Your service record is extraordinary. Under your command, Phoenix saved over 200 lives. You personally neutralized terrorist cells that pose threats to countless others. He gestured to a chair, an invitation to sit, but Sarah remained standing, her body taut as if braced for a blow. The question isn't why you're here, he said. The question is why we failed to recognize who you are. For the first time, Sarah spoke, her voice barely above a whisper, but steady as steel. Because I didn't want to be recognized, sir. I wanted to disappear. The words hung in the air, heavy with the pain of her past. She had hoped her one final mission, a rescue operation meant to go unnoticed, would let her fade back into the shadows. But the commander's next words shattered that hope. That's not your choice anymore. Major, Hassan Clove knows you're alive. By now, half the terrorist networks in this region know Ghost Viper is active again. You're a target, whether you like it or not. The name Hassan Clove sent a chill through her. A war criminal she had once crossed paths with, he had recognized her call sign during the recent mission. The room felt smaller, the air heavier, as the reality settled over her. She had wanted to believe she could outrun her legend, but legends don't get to choose when they're remembered. The commander's voice softened further, his eyes searching hers. What happened on Operation Blackwater wasn't your fault. I've read the classified reports. Your team was betrayed by someone in our own intelligence network. There was no way you could have known. For a fleeting moment, Sarah's carefully constructed mask cracked. The guilt she had carried for 3 years, guilt over the 12 soldiers who died under her command, flickered across her face. 12 good soldiers died because I made the wrong call, sir, she said, her voice tight with suppressed emotion. The commander shook his head. 12 soldiers died because a traitor sold them out. 47 hostages are alive today because you made the right call under impossible circumstances. That's what leaders do, Major. They carry the weight so others don't have to. A knock at the door interrupted the moment. The young lieutenant who had mocked Sarah earlier that day stood in the doorway, his face flushed with shame and uncertainty. Sir, he began, his voice faltering, the men, we wanted to apologize. We had no idea. The commander's gaze shifted from the lieutenant to Sarah, then back again. Lieutenant, he said, his voice calm but cutting, what you and your men had no idea about is that Major Harper holds more combat decorations than this entire base combined. What you had no idea about is that she has saved more lives than you've likely met in your career. The lieutenant's shoulders slumped, his earlier bravado replaced by a humbling realization. Sarah's eyes remained fixed on the wall, but the faintest tremor in her jaw betrayed the storm of emotions she fought to contain. She had wanted to disappear, but the truth of who she was, a leader, a survivor, a hero, refused to stay buried. Sarah Harper, known in hushed tones as Ghost Viper, was a 39-year-old logistics coordinator at Forward Operating Base Echo, her days consumed by the quiet hum of routine, managing supplies, pouring coffee, blending into the background. Beneath this unremarkable facade burned the embers of a past life as an elite special operations commander, a secret she kept locked away, hidden beneath years of purposeful obscurity. The base commander, a weathered officer with a sharp instinct, had recently pieced together her true identity, offering a silent salute that spoke volumes of her unspoken heroism. A young lieutenant, once brash and quick to dismiss her with a smirk, now stood humbled, seeking her mentorship with newfound reverence. The duty officer who had once humiliated her during a briefing carried the sting of his own regret, his respect for her now hard-won. Veteran sergeants, observant enough to catch her subtle tactical habits, the meticulous organization of supplies, the deliberate way she moved, had initially shrugged them off as oddities, but now recognized them as the hallmarks of a seasoned professional. And then there was Hassan Clove, a war criminal whose chilling recognition of her call sign, Ghost Viper, from a distant, blood-soaked mission stirred memories she had fought to bury. The lieutenant stood before her, his shoulders sagging under the weight of his earlier arrogance. Sarah turned to meet his gaze, her voice low but laced with the quiet authority of someone who had led in the world's most perilous shadows. "Lieutenant," she said, her words deliberate, "when you cross paths with someone whose past is a mystery, ask where they have walked before you question their place here. Experience carves lessons no training can replicate." The young officer nodded, his eyes flickering with a mix of remorse and admiration. Hesitating, he found the courage to speak again. "Ma'am, could you consider training us? Your knowledge could make us better others." Sarah's eyes flicked to the commander, then back to the lieutenant. For the first time in 3 years, she saw something other than judgment in a soldier's gaze. Respect, humility, and a genuine desire to grow. "We'll see, Lieutenant," she said softly, her tone carrying a cautious promise. "We'll see." The next morning dawned with a subtle shift in the atmosphere at Forward Operating Base Echo. Sarah rose in the same cramped quarters she'd occupied for months, but something felt different, a faint stirring, as if the weight of her past had begun to ease. She made her way to the mess hall, bracing for the familiar rhythm of pouring coffee and managing supplies. But when she reached her workstation, she froze. There, carefully placed, was a new unit patch. A phoenix, its golden threads blazing against a black backdrop, with her name and rank stitched below, Major Sarah Harper, Ghost Viper. The young lieutenant stood nearby, his nervousness evident in the way he shifted his weight. "Ma'am," he said, his voice steady despite his unease, "the men took up a collection and had this made overnight. We wanted you to have something that reflects who you really are." Sarah lifted the patch, her fingers tracing the intricate stitching. It had been 3 years since she'd worn any symbol of her former life, and the weight of it felt both foreign and deeply familiar, like a piece of herself she'd long buried. The lieutenant pressed on, his confidence growing. "We also wanted to ask, would you consider leading training sessions? Basic tactical awareness, situational assessment, anything you think we need to know." Before Sarah could respond, the mess hall began to fill. Soldiers who had once grabbed their coffee and left without a glance now formed a quiet, respectful line. The duty officer who had once belittled her in front of the room stepped forward first. His face was flushed with shame, but his posture was rigid with respect. "Major," he said, his voice steady, "I owe you an apology. What I said, how I treated you, there's no excuse. Please, let me buy your coffee this morning as a gesture of respect." One by one, soldiers who had overlooked her, dismissed her, or mocked her came forward. Each offered heartfelt apologies, their words heavy with sincerity. Each asked for the chance to learn from her hard-won expertise. The veteran sergeants approached next, their weathered faces softened by newfound respect. "Ma'am," one said, his voice gruff but earnest, "we noticed something different about you from the start. The way you organize supplies, the way you move through the base, it was deliberate, professional. We should have recognized it for what it was." Sarah listened to each soldier in silence, her expression unreadable, but her eyes sharp, taking in every word. When the last had spoken, she scanned the room, meeting the gazes of men and women who now looked at her with respect, where there had once been indifference, curiosity where there had been scorn. "I came here to disappear," she said, her voice soft but resonant, carrying the weight of her truth. "After what happened to my team, I thought I deserved to fade into the shadows, to serve without recognition. I believed that was my punishment." She paused, her eyes dropping to the phoenix patch in her hands, its golden threads catching the dim light of the mess hall. "But hiding from duty isn't the same as embracing it, and you can't heal from wounds you refuse to face." She lifted her gaze to the soldiers before her, her voice steady and resolute. "If you want to learn, I'll teach you, not because I'm chasing atonement, but because good soldiers deserve good training, and because the best way to honor those we've lost is to ensure we don't lose anyone else needlessly." The room erupted in quiet, respectful applause, a sound that carried the weight of acknowledgement and hope. For the first time in 3 years, Sarah felt a spark of purpose reignite within her, like a phoenix rising from the ashes of her past. Sarah Harper, known in whispers as Ghost Viper, stood at the edge of Forward Operating Base Echo, her silhouette sharp against the fading desert sun. At 39, she carried herself with the understated grace of a logistics coordinator, her days filled with schedules and supply chains. But beneath the surface, her past as an elite special operations commander simmered, a secret she'd guarded for months. Tonight, though, something had shifted. She reached for the phoenix patch, its embroidered flames glinting faintly, and pinned it to her uniform. Her fingers lingered over the fabric, and a rare, unguarded smile broke across her face. Not the practice mask she'd worn to blend in, but a spark of something real, something alive. It felt like coming home. The next morning, she stood before a group of soldiers, her voice steady as she announced, "Training begins tomorrow at 0500. Bring your gear, your questions, and your focus. We've got work to do." The room buzzed with anticipation, soldiers exchanging glances, their excitement palpable as they filed out. But one figure hesitated at the door. The young lieutenant who had once scoffed at her, dismissing her as just another desk worker. His eyes now held a different weight, a mix of respect and regret. "Major," he said, his voice low, "thank you for giving us a chance to get this right." Sarah met his gaze, her own softening. Words she hadn't planned slipped out, surprising even her. "Thank you for reminding me that some mistakes can be undone and some stories deserve another chapter." Her words hung in the air, a quiet bridge between their past missteps and a future yet to be written. 6 months later, Forward Operating Base Echo had transformed. It wasn't just a military outpost anymore. It was a proving ground, a hub of tactical excellence that drew units from 3 different military districts. Sarah's courses, sharp and practical, were in high demand, her lessons reshaping how soldiers thought and moved. But the real change ran deeper than training manuals or mission stats. It was in the way the soldiers carried themselves, the way they looked at one another. The young lieutenant, once quick to mock, now led reconnaissance missions with a precision that turned heads, even among grizzled commanders. The duty officer who had once humiliated Sarah during a briefing now sat at the front of her classes, his notebook filled with careful notes, his arrogance replaced by a quiet hunger to learn. He'd tasted the cost of underestimating someone, and it had changed him. Sarah still poured coffee every morning, not out of obligation but by choice. What had once been a way to fade into the background had become something else, a ritual of connection. Soldiers lined up, not just for the steaming cups, but for the moments of wisdom she offered, her words as steady as her hands. One morning, a new recruit, barely out of basic training, leaned forward as she handed him his coffee. "Major," he asked, his voice earnest, "how do you see what someone's really capable of when they're trying to stay invisible?" Sarah paused, her mind flickering back to her own months of hiding, her own journey from shadow to light. She smiled faintly. "You don't focus on what they're doing," she said. "You watch how they do it. Excellence leaves a mark, no matter how hard someone tries to hide it." Her lessons stretched far beyond the battlefield. She taught them to read the subtle cues of body language, to sense unspoken needs before they were voiced, to lead without needing to shout. Above all, she taught them to see the person behind the uniform. "Everyone you meet carries a story you'd know nothing about," she'd tell her classes, her voice calm but firm. "Some stories are etched in scars you can't see. Some victories are won in silence. Your job isn't to judge the story, it's to know it's there." Her words took root, and the base began to change. Soldiers stopped rushing to assumptions, instead asking themselves a simple question before dismissing anyone. "What don't I know about this person's story?" The impact rippled outward. Enemy activity in the region dwindled, not because of heavier artillery, but because Sarah's students saw what others missed: patterns in the chaos, threats in the quiet, opportunities in the mundane. Her training sharpened their instincts, turning good soldiers into exceptional ones. Even Hassan Klav, the war criminal who had once frozen at the sound of her call sign, Ghost Viper, had fled to another continent, his operations disrupted by the long shadow of her legend. But Sarah's greatest triumph wasn't in the missions or the medals. It was in the culture she'd built. The base had adopted a new tradition. No one was written off as insignificant. Every soldier, from the greenest recruit to the saltiest veteran, was seen as a story worth understanding. One evening, as the desert sky burned gold and purple, Sarah stood at the base's perimeter, watching the horizon swallow the sun. The young lieutenant approached, his boots crunching softly on the sand. "Major," he said, his voice tentative, "do you ever regret coming back, choosing to step out of the shadows?" She turned the question over in her mind, her eyes tracing the colors bleeding across the sky. "For 3 years, I thought hiding was the same as healing," she said at last, her voice steady but laced with something raw. "But some wounds only mend when you let the light touch them." She turned to face him, her expression calm yet unyielding. "The world doesn't need more noise. It needs people who see clearly, act wisely, and serve faithfully. Sometimes the greatest courage isn't in being seen, it's in teaching others how to see." Her words lingered, a quiet testament to the strength she'd found, not in the spotlight, but in the lives she'd shaped, the soldiers she'd taught to look deeper, to question, to understand. Valor, she knew, didn't always demand attention. Sometimes it walked quietly, unnoticed, lifting everyone around it higher.